rage and justify to him that further acts of violence were necessary, because this is all he knows.
And there was just this hatred by Edward Johnson. He had just a great disdain for, the people that he deemed to be responsible for the loss of his eye. I would say that the general consensus was that it wasn't just all staff, it was one particular staff who he felt was responsible, because the gate was accidentally open when in turn he was the one that gate opened or closed, took a weapon, and went and assaulted another offender. So I think it just goes to illustrate kind of his way of thinking.
A lot of anger against the prison and against correctional officers after that incident where he lost the vision in his eye.
Very early on, Johnson probably had this mixed idea about authority. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they supposed to serve and protect? His father, who was a police officer, murdered his mother.
An inmate might want to attack a guard for numerous reasons. They can feel disrespected, they can be angered, they can be enraged, having a psychotic episode, and just have total disregard for life. And they don't really need a reason.
He had articulated that he was going to get revenge for the loss of his eye. Often.
Having lost an eye within the first year of being incarcerated, Johnson's record did not improve. He was constantly in trouble.
When I look at his discipline record, Edward Johnson doesn't look like he was somebody that was trying to improve his life.
His criminal activities within the prison system, which involves assaults, threats, weapons, disobeying orders, being in an unauthorized area.
Was in possession of tobacco and alcohol too, so he was probably using substances throughout his incarceration as well, adding more fuel to the fire.
Edward Johnson had a growing desire for revenge. Prison staff believed he was a danger to everyone in Stillwater and should be transferred to a higher security facility.
Some of the threats in prison for correctional officers and for the inmates is threat of being violently attacked. You can get stabbed, you can get slashed with a slashing weapon, you can get what's called gas, where they will throw some type of substance and they attempt to get you in the face, or just jumped by 100 or 200 individuals in a riot or staff assault.
When an inmate was labeled a problem person, it really was a loose cannon, a significant risk to other inmates or SEALs. They would be transferred to the Open Archives facility, which is a facility that has closer scrutiny of inmates.
Rather than being transferred, Johnson was put to work inside the prison with the hope of rehabilitation.
For the industry program at the Stillwater facility, it's just like you walk into an industrial complex. They've got a wood shop where they can make wood products too, office furniture, upholstery.
If an inmate has a history of disciplinary issues, especially threats exacted against prison personnel, they should not be in industry, ever. They had access to tools like hammers, sharp tools, the kind of tools that you would expect, like, in a mechanic shop or in an industry facility where they make products.
You're talking about potentially people with violent histories that are in possession and using tools that can inflict great bodily harm or death.
Why is this guy out in an environment where he can
Often hear them yelling, or catcalling as you're walking through, or banging on the metal bars.
There had been lots of assaults that have occurred over the years, and vicious assaults on staff. I mean, I'm talking people have been hospitalized and had to retire early or never came back to work. Multiple offenders fighting, that kind of amplifies the situation.
I talked with many different union officials who represent the correctional officers in Minnesota. One of the things that they stressed was there aren't enough correctional officers working staff.
The guards is unsafe across the agency. I mean, you might have 4 corrections staff in a unit of over 200 offenders, you do the math on that, the odds are not stacked in your favor if they were to choose to do things a certain way.
By 2018, Edward Johnson had spent almost 1,700 days in segregation, but was allowed to join the industry program to learn new skills.
With the record that Johnson had in prison, the time he spent in segregation, which is the jail within the prison, in other words, he's not turning his life around. He's not changing his behavior. He doesn't deserve to be out in industry. That industry should be reserved for those inmates that are proving that they want to change their lifestyle, change their choices, and become a productive citizen.
There's really not what I consider to be a solid vetting process for determining who was the best candidates for these positions.
The prison officers working at Stillwater were very aware of the potential problems in industry, and the understood the situation.
My career in corrections back in 2005, and I was, person's goal.
Joe was a kind of officer that would be respected by inmates, staff, and the public. He did his job. He did his job appropriately and respectfully. He was the kind of officer that if there was something that the inmate requested and he could do it and it was within the guidelines of the SOP, he would do it. Where others may not. They might say, I don't have time to deal with you. Joe would take care of that.
During his career, he bounced around to different places throughout the facility, working in the education unit where the offenders go to school, and then as well as out into the industry area too. He was just always that guy that you could go to, but he also wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right.
He was very concerned about himself and his fellow employees, and he had actually said, and I quote, "It's going to take one of us to die before there's any significant change."
Since losing his eye, Edward Johnson had been searching for an opportunity to get revenge, and he found one.
On July 18, 2018, and I was working that day. I cover the Minnesota Correctional Facility. Correctional Officer Gahn was working there that day. He was in the industry building.
Edward Johnson was also in industry that day, still blaming the prison system and guards for the events which left him blind in one eye. He targeted Officer Gahn.
Edward Johnson, he just carried himself in a different way. He was like quiet, kind of almost like in a Pink Panther sneaky kind of way. It just always kind of gave me goosebumps a little bit, just because the way he carried himself.
Mr. Johnson came up behind him, and really unprovoked, I just started smashed him in the head with a hammer.
Joseph Gahn, he was alone. There were no other COs there. And Johnson got access to him and then proceeded to bludgeon him with a hammer. And he stabbed him to death with a tool that he had made in industry.
Bad had happened, but I wasn't exactly sure what that was. A half hour of that, the floor, and I knew something didn't feel right. Well, one of them, God bless his soul, pulled me out of the room and told me what had happened.
Other inmates did try to step in, but by the time they got in there, this was very quick. You see, he was killed quickly, and then he fled and barricaded himself in a room.
The officers that responded, first they had to get through the barricade, and one officer stated that he didn't recognize Joe.
I think I found out that it was Johnson that murdered Joe. It was like a few years after when everything started hitting the media. I known who Johnson was my entire career up until that point, so I definitely recognized him. I knew the name and everything like that.
It was shocking. This was national news. This was the first time in the state of Minnesota that a correctional officer had been killed by an inmate. So it was just unheard of. I mean, it was just very upsetting and very disturbing.
Shortly after the attack, Johnson was charged and later pleaded guilty to the murder of Joseph Gum.
I don't think I need to tell you that when Joe died, he was all alone. Something Mencore staff knew and something the criminal who killed Joe knew also.
According to the 2018 investigation file, an inmate told investigators that Gum should not have been left alone in the prison's mental shop with dozens of prisoners. Officer Gum had only a radio, pepper spray, and handcuffs when Johnson attacked him.
He's a coward. He attacks from behind. He attacks the weaker. And very difficult to talk about. I, like many other people, would like to go toe-to-toe with that man, put it that way.
There should never be a staff that's by themselves in a shop with inmates with potential weapons. That to me is a no-brainer.
As far as Edward Johnson was concerned, he had taken out his revenge.
On the exact day that Joe was murdered was the 14-year anniversary of the date that this man had been assaulted by another inmate and lost the vision in his right eye. It wasn't just a coincidence that the day that he killed Joe,
Johnson had been planning to attack prison staff.
Why was Joe the target when, there's staff that are not liked by inmates? Why not one of them? Well, then you come to realize inmates are opportunists. They take an opportunity of the situation, and Joe was in that situation. He was in that uniform. That made him the target.
there was no evidence that Joe Gum had any issues with Johnson. Nothing. Zero. No evidence whatsoever.
When you think about psychopaths and people who engage in this high-level violence, they don't have what we call consequential thinking. They typically engage in what serves them in the moment. So if Johnson wanted to kill that officer, if he was angry, if this is the only way he knows how to deal with emotions, he was going to deal with those emotions by murdering.
The family and friends of Officer Gum were devastated.
Anyone you talk to about Correctional Officer Gum will tell you what a kind soul he was. And I'm not sure you would hear that about every correctional officer, but certainly in this case, it just makes it incredibly heartbreaking.
I was mad, as well as grieving. I was really mad. I still am. Still am mad. Should have never happened.
In 2018, immediately after murdering prison officer Joe Gum, Edward Johnson was finally transferred to high-security prison, Oak Park Heights.
So in the case of Edward Johnson utilizing a hammer to brutally murder a correctional officer, that's fairly rare because inmates that have access to those type of weaponry, whether it's a hammer behind the work chain wall or knives inside of a culinary kitchen, the inmates in there are usually privileged to be working in that area, so they don't want to mess up their opportunities.
When an inmate was labeled a problem person who really was a loose cannon, they would be transferred to the Oak Park Heights facility.
Oak Park Heights facility, which is our Supermax facility, which when it was built was the merely Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado.
The Oak Park Heights prison, which is just about 5 miles from the Stillwater prison, is a very different experience. When you are there, it's very quiet. Each inmate has their own cell, and the cells they're big metal steel doors that slide and slide into place. So it's a very different experience as from visiting the Stillwater prison.
Edward Johnson had committed the worst possible crime in prison, murdering an officer. Now, all the officers feared for their lives.
We always knew that there was a possibility that any one of us could be killed in the line of duty, but it was never like on the forefront of our thinking. I was in complete shock, kind of a little bit of denial at first until it started kind of hitting the waves on the media, and it was like, a reality, and yeah, it's still hard to believe that it happened.
Officer Gom was the first correctional officer killed in the state of Minnesota. Most of the staff that worked with him and most of the staff throughout the department were infuriated because it could have been prevented. The reports that officers had written were concerns of the safety in that environment that Joe was killed in were not considered.
Well, the governor was very responsive, and it was obvious he felt terrible about what happened. The commissioner for the DOC was responsive also. Their own agency went after him really hard. But the DOC fought that, claiming, in essence, that they didn't do anything wrong.
After Joe Gom was murdered, the prison went into lockdown. I believe it was 3 weeks. Yeah, that was definitely one of the most troubling times when the offender population was locked down, and some of the things that we had to listen to them saying.
Folk tried to buy me out once, but I ain't selling. Shop keeps this whole town fed. All sorts of folks stop in here. Chief Dunbar purchases from me all the time. Been amazed to see just how fast this town sprung up. Before long, we'll rival Saint Denis. shop keeps this whole town fed. All sorts of folks stop in here. Chief Dunbar purchases from me all the time. Wish the Imperial would bring a new show in. I've seen them all twice already. The lake, the plains, the mountain view. This town has it all. Hope you find what you're looking for. I ain't one to boast, but my shop keeps this whole town fed. You need any help? Just give a holler. Before I was here, folks would head clear up to Strawberry for their goods. When I was first starting out, Blackwater weren't much more than an outpost. Just look at us now. Now, I happen to be personable with Sheriff Dunbar, so don't you pocket nothing. Wish the Imperial would bring a new show in. I've seen them all twice already. Been amazed to see just how fast this town sprung up. Before long, we'll rival Saint Denis. The lake, the plains, the mountain view. This town has it all. Take a look around, see what you like. Always nice to see a paying customer. When I was first starting out, Blackwater weren't much more than an outpost. Just look at us now. Been amazed to see just how fast this town sprung up. Before long, we'll rival Saint Denis. My wares are priced fair, unlike some I could name. The lake, the plains, the mountain view. first starting out, Blackwater weren't much more than an outpost. Just look at us now. All sorts of folks stop in here. Chief Dunbar purchases from me all the time. I built this shop up out of nothing, half a lifetime ago. Now, I happen to be personable with Sheriff Dunbar, so don't you pocket nothing. I ain't one to boast, but my shop keeps this whole town fed. Take a look around and see what you like. Wish the Imperial would bring a new show in. I've seen them all twice already. All sorts of folks stop in here. Chief Dunbar purchases from me all the time. Been amazed to see just how fast this town sprung up. Before long, we'll rival Saint Denis. what you're looking for. First starting out, Blackwater weren't much more than an outpost. Just look at us now. Nice to see a paying customer. Wish the Imperial would bring a new show in. I've seen them all twice already. Priced fair, unlike some I could name. this shop up out of nothing, half a lifetime ago. Boast, but my shop keeps this whole town fed. This town has it all. Be personable with Sheriff Dunbar, so don't you pocket nothing. All sorts of folks stop in here. Chief Dunbar purchases from me all the time. Boast, but my shop keeps this whole town fed. See what you like. All sorts of folks stop in here. Chief Dunbar purchases from me all the time.
were some offenders that were legitimately like upset about it too, which at that point in time I found it pretty. I guess I didn't know that I was having empathy, but I think I've seen some empathy after that, even from the offender population. There were other guys that would sit there and yell stuff at us for themselves. We call them cell warriors. The guys that are way up on a tier off to the side and they're yelling stuff at you, and you know, you guys should learn from your friend, and that can happen again, and things like that they would say. So we were working in that.
On July 26, 2018, a funeral was held for Joe Gum.
Thousands of correctional officers and dignitaries came in from all over the United States and Canada to be there present. It was an moving ceremony.
Joe Gum's funeral was like nothing that I had ever seen. It was full police honors. So, 21 gun salute. There were agencies from around the country that came. It was a media spectacle. There were helicopters flying over the cemetery. There was just a lot going on. It was a lot to process. Our chaplain from the facility officiated his service. So there's just kind of a lot of emotion with just seeing how shattered everybody was, and just the outpouring of support that the agency and the people in the agency and his family and everybody received. It was just completely overwhelming.
Joe was not married at the time. He had a girlfriend in Chicago, but the state really had some really nice ceremonies for his death.